One of the most painful experiences that a person can endure is the pain of being abandoned and betrayed by someone that you once deeply loved, trusted, and looked up to. This person could be a romantic partner, or it could even go deeper to a more vulnerable time in your life as a child. In Cassie's case, it was her father, a male figure in her life who she was deeply bonded to and who eventually continued to bring her pain. It created this cycle that she was unaware of, a cycle of tolerance. What I mean by this is that she continued to build false hope over and over again, only for it to be crushed over and over again, only for her to forgive over and over again because of the love and respect that she had for him. And this eventually taught Cassie to tolerate poor behavior as long as she could avoid bringing any trouble to them to prevent herself from experiencing that painful feeling of abandonment again. She developed anxiety in relationships, afraid that her partners would lose interest in her or leave her, so she put them above her own needs and her own friendships, and she allowed them to mistreat her because this anxious attachment created this inner desperation within her. Do you relate to Cassie? If you do, this video was made specifically for you. Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. We're going to be talking about self-sabotage as well as abandonment issues and low self-esteem in love. If you relate to these issues, this is some of my advice using a character study of Cassie from Euphoria as an example. Here are my video chapters. They will also be linked in the description if you want to just click ahead to whatever parts you feel are relevant to you. Let's go straight into the first chapter, the sources of Cassie's pain. To understand Cassie, we need to understand her fears and her desires. Cassie's foundational fears are to be unwanted and to feel abandoned. These fears also branch into other fears in her life. The first fear branches into her fear of becoming like her mother, who she viewed as undesirable and unwanted. The first real relationship Cassie witnessed was in her early childhood between her parents. The way that she viewed this relationship, she saw her father as this charming man who all the women wanted, and her mother as this kind of like a messy person who was just kind of tolerated by her charming father. Her father would flirt with other women in front of her mom, who would be filled with anger and jealousy, and then she would start showing destructive behaviors like over drinking and just causing a scene. The way that Cassie would see her mother was just undesirable, troubled, unwanted. But the truth is, Cassie's mother was just acting out because she was deeply hurt by all of the attention that her father would entertain from other women. But the way that Cassie viewed it was like, oh, look at my charming father and like my mess of a mother. And she just feared becoming like her mother, someone who was flawed, someone who was tolerated and not truly loved or wanted. But also Cassie noticed that she has a lot of similarities to her mother. And so it feels like she started fighting with her and distancing herself from her mother so that she can distance herself from being like her mother, which honestly just did the opposite effect. Cassie just became a little bit more self-destructive by doing that, and the root issue of her mother was that her mother was also self-destructive. She became more like her mother the more that her character progressed. Fear number 2, the fear of abandonment. This is the root of Cassie's abandonment issues, and it's also the root of her desperation in relationships. As mentioned before, Cassie's view of her father was this charming and charismatic man. The way she viewed her father was initially higher than the way that she viewed her mother. Her mother was not a very good role model for her, and so she turned to her father, who was a bit more grounded, as someone to look up to and aspire to be more like. But then her father started to succumb to his addictions, and then she began to internalize this deep and personal rejection. Sometimes she would blame herself for the abandonment, sometimes she would blame her mom, but she refused to blame her father because she just didn't want to shatter this image of him. Instead, this abandonment became a shadow that followed her. She began to devalue herself and let others walk all over her. She became a major people pleaser who desperately craved the validation and attention of others. And she also desperately tried to avoid that painful feeling of abandonment again. By putting her father on this pedestal and refusing to accept that he did any wrong, she started to put other men in her life on this pedestal as well. She also slowly begins obsessing with molding herself into this image of perfection and thinking that the more attractive, submissive, risky, and sexualized as she is, the more accepted and loved that she'd be. Cassie didn't want to feel troubled and unwanted like the way that she saw her mother. She wanted to feel desired and wanted. So she would channel that through sex and her idea of fantasy and romance. Unfortunately, this just made things worse. She would be used and taken advantage of by men who just viewed her as an object and didn't respect her. She constantly felt more and more unwanted and undesirable and blamed any abandonments that showed up in her life on herself and her not being good enough. That's what makes her deepest desires and motivations so surrounded by finding love and romance. romance. Chapter 2. The first thing that you need to understand about yourself are what are your fears and your desires. Most people don't even know themselves, so how do you expect to improve on your weaknesses if you cannot even effectively identify your weaknesses? For Cassie, it becomes obvious as we observe her. We're outsiders looking into her life. It's easy for us to see that she deeply fears being abandoned. It's easy for us to see that she has this desperate craving for love. As well, it's very obvious. We can tell that she has a low self-esteem, that she views herself in a negative light, that she doesn't really value herself. Cassie obsesses with upkeeping an image of perfection. This flawless exterior is meant to hide what she feels are a cluster of flaws that are hiding within her. And we can also see that it becomes a vicious cycle because the more that others devalue her, the more that she feels less of herself. However, we are just the observers of her character. This level of introspection is something that she doesn't possess. Her self-awareness to these issues is not there, and therefore she would have no idea where to start on her self-improvement journey. Just like Cassie, it would be a game changer for you just to sit down with yourself and understand where these issues stem from. Do you also carry a fear of abandonment? Where do you think the first time that you felt this stemmed from? What are some events that led up to this feeling? Do you feel that you deserve the abandonment due to the flaws that you feel you have? You need to ask yourself these kinds of questions consistently. You also need to understand that the source of your self-sabotage is rooted in your fears and desires. If you don't understand those fundamental things, you will not be able to self-reflect properly. You need to understand that your very existence right now, just you being here, just you watching this video, just you existing on this earth is a miracle. But you're still locked away in your own personal and mental prison. So it is time to change. Your precious time is not going to be wasted on these things anymore. It's just not going to. I will not allow it. If you don't hold a high value for yourself, you will begin to accept the low treatment that others give you and assume that it is reflective of your worth. What part of you is that wounded part that you constantly have to feed and fuel instead of heal until it turned into this addictive cycle? And this isn't simply an issue that you can just say, well, maybe it stemmed from childhood. For example, feeling abandoned in childhood may have been the first mark of that fear, but over time, the additional and consistent behaviors that stemmed from your need of validation have only reaffirmed and fueled your inner fears. So if you don't change now, you will continue to dig yourself into a deeper hole. Which leads us to chapter 3, how ignoring this will ruin your life. If you are lacking self-awareness and continuing to ignore your deeper needs, you are robbing yourself of happiness. I spent a long time ignoring my deeper needs and just acting on my feelings. It's like when I had a feeling, I would impulsively try to appease that feeling, and it's like I was living for my mind. I was being controlled by my feelings and desires rather than myself being able to control and ground myself. And this just leads to you ignoring the things that are actually good for you in life, like your family, your friends, like good things that surround you. Your priorities will also slowly just go all out of whack, and like your passions, all the things that make life so magical seem to just be sucked away from you when you're living in this cycle. So stop ignoring your needs and stop ignoring your inner child. If you desire love because you have fears, and if this is something that stems from fear, you fear being unwanted, you fear being alone, you are not going to prioritize a healthy form of love that uplifts you, that benefits your life. Instead, you will feel this deeper need, and it's kind of like a desperation in your heart that just pulls at anything that just looks like love. You will become obsessed with just the idea of love. And the idea of love is usually love without boundaries, without respect. If you keep ignoring that, then you will automatically act on your impulses. And then you're going to get that instant gratification. And then you're going to come back and you're going to ask yourself, why am I like this? Why am I doing things that are bad for me, even though I know they're bad for me? And this is just a reminder and a nudge at you to start being a little bit more introspective. Try to self-reflect and understand your deeper needs more. That desperate need will control you. It will compel you to set aside everything in your life for that dopamine hit and for that instant gratification. One way to think about this is picture your inner child just holding toys and coming to you, just wanting someone to play with them, just give them some attention, only being ignored. Or maybe like you have a memory of just being on stage, looking around for your parents or family members in the crowd and you don't see them there, and you just feel that sadness within you, like you don't feel supported, you don't feel accepted or loved. That inner child is still within you somewhere, and it is longing for love and affection and attention. You can start addressing this part of you by visualizing that child, by visualizing that part of you that once existed and still exists within your heart somewhere and is so desperately aching for those things, and you can start addressing that part of you. Visualize the little you and speak to them and fulfill their needs. The more you meditate on this, the more you make this a practice, the more you will start to view yourself differently. Like, it's really hard to hate yourself when you view yourself from this compassionate lens. The love and nurturing that you are so deeply craving, you can also provide to yourself. When was the last time that you gave yourself a self-care day, a personal care day that wasn't for the reason of looking good for some event or for someone else? Or created a meal with the intention in your mind that I'm going to nourish myself because I care about myself. I'm going to give myself the nutrients that I need out of love for myself. The more that you start to program your mind and create these thinking patterns, these positive thinking patterns, the more you start to build your self-esteem up, and the more that you start to value yourself. Avoiding your hurt is only going to delay your healing. You probably have already heard this quote enough: like attracts like, but it is so unbelievably true. When you have a part of you that's wounded and you're so desperately craving love and affection and all of these things, you're only going to attract people who sense that vulnerability on you and want to take advantage of it, or other people who are also hurting, who are not healthy partners, who are not in a position to be in a healthy relationship. If you neglect yourself and devalue yourself, you will begin to also attract people who will neglect you and devalue you as well. So the main takeaway for this chapter is that focusing on self-reflection and your own well-being is the key to breaking free from this destructive pattern. Chapter 4, Taming the Gremlin in your head. There is this annoying little gremlin in your head, okay? He lives there, and he made himself comfortable. The more he invades different parts of your mind, the more powerful he becomes. He is a squatter, a menace, and he will never leave. Your goal is not to eliminate him. Your goal is to shrink him and take away all his power. It is your mind that he just invaded. So when you get a text message from someone who you know is bad for you, the gremlin's voice is going to be talking in your ear. Blah, 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 blah.
He will be better this time. He's going to be better this time. Oh, I know he hurt me, and he was so bad for me, and he really impacted my life, and basically it destroyed my life and my friendships and my family and so many bad things, but I can change him. He'll change. I just miss his smile on his head.
No, that gremlin is your biggest enemy. It is not the booty call texture or the toxic friend or whatever else you're about to let in your mind. They are not your enemies. It is the annoying, migraine-inducing voice in your head that just won't shut up. But have you ever considered that this voice acting this way and having this much power isn't actually normal? You have gotten so used to these thought patterns that you've practically convinced yourself that this is normal, that all of these irrational thoughts are completely valid, and then you act on them. You believe and act on every feeling that you have because it is all spinning in your head without any semblance of control. First of all, you have to practice self-discipline. And second of all, you have to be able to identify your thought patterns so you can neutralize them. On the more long-term and more challenging end, I would say practice mindfulness consistently and journal and set realistic goals and actually complete them so that you can develop a sense of self-discipline. And I will get into more depth about these kinds of strategies in another video, but for gremlin specific advice, I want you to simply learn, memorize, and identify what cognitive distortions are. Memorize some, doesn't have to be all. In CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy, therapists will actually guide and teach their patients different cognitive distortions so that their patients can clearly identify and understand what their thinking patterns are. And just by learning these, just by understanding these are, like, they're able to effectively recognize and identify these thoughts and then start over time neutralizing them, which with repetition, you can really transform the way that you think, and the way that you think controls everything in your life. My issue was catastrophizing. My favorite phrase at one point was, what if? What if this? What if that? But I think one thing that really, really helped me is like, I asked myself, okay, so what if that happened? Like, it's actually sometimes my thoughts, like I would just think about it and I'm like, oh my God, like the way I'm thinking about this is so silly. Like, let me give you an example, like a little rundown. What if I set this boundary and say no, and then they take it the wrong way and they get upset and then they stop liking me and then they leave me and then I'm gonna have another failed relationship and then I'm gonna just end up spending the rest of my life alone because at this point I keep failing in relationships. What a silly way to think. If you catch yourself in this thought pattern, you're going to be like, okay, hold on. What if I set this boundary and they say no and it upsets them? Okay, it upsets them. Ask why it upsets them. Okay, how do I deal with that situation? Communicate. I'll ask them, why does this boundary upset you? Okay, next what if? And then it upsets them so much that they end up leaving me. Good riddance, okay? Why do I need someone in my life who cannot even respect the most basic boundary? And now I'm gonna think about it on a grand scheme, on a bigger picture. What kind of relationship do I even visualize for myself? What kind of relationship do I want in my life? I want a relationship where I can communicate effectively with the person and we can respect each other. So for you to be upset by this, good riddance. You have now shown yourself for what you are, which is not what I'm looking for in my life in the end. So why does it matter? Another failed relationship, well, the past does not reflect on the future. They are two different things. Why would you ever want someone who only likes you if they can walk all over you? Last time I checked, you were a human being, not a doormat. Chapter 5. I don't need to convince you to change. It's your choice. You know that you need to change. You know it, I know it. That's why you're here watching this video today and why you stuck around this long. You need to understand that without a change to your behavior, there will be no change to your circumstances. The toxic relationships and friendships that surround you, this will be your life forever until you decide that it is no longer going to be your life. And you will have to make the decision now without delay. You're here watching this video today because you related to Cassie and you might feel like you just needed to hear the advice today. And to that I say that you're already one step ahead of Cassie's character because you're actually taking the time to self-improve. You're actually taking the time to really understand yourself rather than hide behind a fake facade or like this image of perfection. You also might feel like you've hurt your own relationships in life and that you feel a lot of regret and guilt and things that you just kind of want to change, pathways that you want to just spin around for yourself. You have to understand that people who hurt others are usually not even like evil people. A lot of the times they're just neglectful or people that are hurt themselves. And you never want to be in the position where you're just feeling a lot of guilt for the way that you treated others, which is certainly the position that Cassie ended up getting herself in with the way that she hurt her friend. These people, they neglect their feelings so much so that that inner child within them starts throwing this huge tantrum and things get so overwhelming that they just decide to place the needs of that inner child above others. That is not how healthy relationships work. That is not how healthy family dynamics work. That is not how healthy friendships work. That is not the way that a healthy relationship with yourself would cultivate. Healthy friendships, relationships, and family dynamics will consider each person, each individual person, as equally as possible. So with that, I don't need to convince you to change. It is your choice. If you watch this and you still want to text that toxic ex, that's your choice. You are a free person and you make your own choices, but you must be okay to deal with the fact that your reality is not going to change. The reality that makes you so unhappy is not going to change until you decide that it's time for it to change. I'm not going to leave you today without giving you guys some action items. I want you to do whatever is easier and more effective for you. If sitting with your thoughts helps you ponder and think better, then put on some meditation music and just start asking yourself these questions. If journaling is better for you, then light a candle and get comfortable and start interviewing yourself with these 3 questions. These are the 3 things that I want you to ask yourself, which are a very good starting point for developing your introspection. For the category of self-reflection, I want you to identify your triggers. So ask yourself this question: what past situations or behaviors triggered my anxiety around abandonment? You can replace the word abandonment with validation or whatever the specific issue is that you struggle with. The second category is self-esteem. What are my strengths and the things that I admire about myself? You can eventually develop some affirmations around these strengths. Finally, for the third category, boundary setting, I want you to ask yourself, What makes me uncomfortable in a relationship or friendship that I will never tolerate ever again? If you are aware of the sources of your self-sabotage as well as your desires and needs, while also building up your self-esteem, you will be able to, over time, completely change your thought patterns and improve upon any self-destructive habits. The time is now to start understanding your deeper needs. That's it for today, guys. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you did enjoy this video, leave a comment down below of the next character that you'd like me to analyze and tell me why you relate to them. And maybe it could act as an inspiration for my next video. I hope you guys have a fantastic day, and I will see you next week.